Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt journeys that inspire and connect us all. In today's story, we dive into the life of Emily, a woman whose seemingly perfect world is shattered by betrayal. But through heartbreak, resilience, and the unexpected kindness of others, she finds the strength to rebuild her life and discover a love she never thought possible. Join us as we explore her journey of loss, hope, and new beginnings. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories to start today's tale and stay connected for more incredible stories. Let's begin. When it all began, I didn't know how quickly life could unravel. My name is Emily, and for much of my marriage, I believed in the kind of love that held a family together, the kind of love that was unshakable. James and I had built a life together, a life I thought was stable, safe, and real. But all of that changed on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I discovered his betrayal. I was driving home from picking up groceries, a mundane task, really, but one that gave me a small sense of purpose in our suburban life in Chicago. As I passed James's office, I saw him standing outside. It was an unexpected sight. James rarely stepped out during the workday. I was about to honk and wave, but then I noticed her, a woman with long, glossy brown hair and heels that clicked confidently on the pavement. She approached James with a smile that made me stop breathing for a moment. Then, to my utter disbelief, she kissed him. Not on the cheek. Not like a casual colleague, on the lips. And James, he didn't pull away. He leaned into it, his hand resting lightly on her waist as if it belonged there. I sat frozen in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. My breath caught in my throat as they climbed into his car together and drove off. My mind raced with questions. Who was she? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I seen the signs? I stayed there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, until my phone buzzed. It was a reminder to pick up our daughter, Megan, from school. Megan, my bright, curious 8-year-old who adored her dad more than anything in the world. I swallowed the lump in my throat, started the car, and drove to her school, doing my best to keep my emotions from spilling over. That evening, I decided to confront James. I couldn't hold the truth inside any longer, even though I feared what it might reveal. When he came home around 9 p.m., late as usual, I was putting our 4-year-old son, Tyler, to bed. James went straight to the kitchen, as he often did, to heat up the dinner I had left for him. His usual routine felt foreign to me now, tainted by the image of him with that woman. Once Tyler was asleep, I walked downstairs to find James sitting at the table, his tie loosened and his phone resting next to his plate. He smiled at me. "Hi, love," he said, leaning in for a kiss. I turned away. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brows furrowing. "James," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" He looked confused, his fork frozen mid-air. "What do you mean?" "I saw you today," I said bluntly. "I was driving past your office. You were outside with a woman, a brunette. She kissed you. And you didn't stop her. Be honest. James, do you have a mistress?" The silence that followed was suffocating. He put down his fork, his face pale, and looked at me. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, spin some story about how I misunderstood. But then he sighed deeply. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Her name is Claire. She's a colleague." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. My breath caught, and tears burned in my eyes. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "About a year," he said quietly. "A year?" I repeated, my voice rising. "A year? James, you've been lying to me for a year." "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "I don't want to change anything. You and the kids mean everything to me." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "And what does she mean to you?" "She's just different." "It's complicated," he said, his voice trembling. "Complicated?" I spat. Standing up. You've destroyed our family. James. This isn't complicated, it's betrayal. And now you expect me to act like everything is fine? He sighed again, running a hand through his hair. I'm not giving you a divorce, he said firmly. The kids need us to stay together. They need stability. And you think this is stability? I shot back. A father who lies and cheats. A mother who cries herself to sleep every night. We argued late into the night, our voices rising and falling like waves crashing against a fragile shore. By the time I went to bed, exhausted and broken, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, James left the house early, slipping out before anyone was awake. He didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. I was left with my thoughts and the heavy realization that the life I had built was crumbling around me. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on my children. I brought Megan to school, took Tyler to daycare, and worked on my translation projects. But every quiet moment was filled with questions I couldn't answer. How had I missed the signs? Was it my fault? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? I thought back to the early days of our relationship, to the time when James and I were young and in love. We met in college, me, a linguistics major dreaming of a career in translation, him, a tech whiz on the verge of a promising career. We were different in so many ways. But we clicked. Our connection was electric. Our love effortless. When I got pregnant with Megan, we married in a small ceremony, full of hope and excitement for the future. Now, 8 years later, that future felt like a distant memory. James was no longer the man I thought I knew. And I was no longer the woman who believed in fairy tales. That evening, I made a decision. I would not stay in a marriage built on lies. I would not allow my children to grow up in a household where love had been replaced by resentment. James may have shattered my world, but I would pick up the pieces and rebuild for myself and for my kids. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but I knew I had to try. The morning after I resolved to end my marriage, the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. Filing for divorce wasn't just a decision, it was a journey, a complicated, messy, and emotional one. But it was one I had to take. James returned home that evening, carrying an air of indifference as if our confrontation the night before had been a passing storm. His demeanor only fueled my determination. While he played with Tyler and pretended everything was fine, I sat in the corner of the living room, scrolling through legal resources on my phone. I needed help, but I didn't know where to start. The answer came unexpectedly. My best friend, Laura, called me that night, her voice warm and familiar. "Emily, you don't sound like yourself," she said after a few minutes of catching up. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. But then they spilled out. Raw and unfiltered, the affair, Claire, the lies, the fear of losing my children. Laura listened quietly, her support like a lifeline in the storm. "Emily," she said firmly, "you're not doing this alone. I know a great lawyer. His name is Robert Jennings. He helped my cousin during her divorce." And she couldn't stop singing his praises. The next day, I called Robert's office and scheduled a consultation. Just making the appointment felt like a small victory, a step forward. When I met Robert later that week, he greeted me with a calm confidence that immediately put me at ease. He was in his early 40s, with sharp features softened by a kind smile. As I recounted my story, his expression shifted from professional detachment to genuine concern. "You've been through a lot," he said when I finished. "But you're stronger than you think. We'll get through this together." His words were comforting, but the road ahead was daunting. Robert explained the legal process, from filing for divorce to determining custody arrangements and dividing property. The mention of custody made my stomach churn. "James wants to take the kids," I said, my voice trembling. "He threatened to leave me with nothing." Robert leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Emily, Judges almost always prioritize the parent who's been the primary caregiver. That's you. It won't be easy, but we'll fight for what's best for your children. I left his office feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The fight had begun. Back at home, the tension with James was unbearable. He came and went as he pleased, spending more nights away and leaving me to explain his absences to Megan and Tyler. "Where's Dad?" Megan asked one evening as we sat at the dinner table. "He's working late." "Sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. It was a lie, of course. But how could I tell her the truth? How could I explain that her father was choosing another woman over us? James's audacity reached new heights one weekend when he brought Claire to the house. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard her voice, a stranger's voice, drifting up from the kitchen. Curious and confused, I went downstairs, only to find James and Claire sitting at the table, drinking coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Claire's rounded belly confirmed what James had told me: she was pregnant. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "Why is she in my home?" James didn't even flinch. "This is my house too, Emily," he said coldly. Claire smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Soon I'll be living here instead of you." Her words were like a slap to the face. I turned to James, hoping he would deny it, defend me, do something. But he just sat there in silence, his gaze fixed on the table. That night, I packed a bag for myself and the kids. I couldn't stay there, not with Claire's presence hanging over us like a dark cloud. Megan and Tyler didn't understand why we had to leave, but I promised them it was only temporary. We ended up in a small rental apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was ours, a place where I could start fresh. The days turned into weeks, and I threw myself into building a new routine. I juggled work, parenting, and meetings with Robert, who became not just my lawyer but a source of encouragement. One afternoon, Robert and I met at a cafe to discuss the upcoming custody hearing. I brought Megan and Tyler along, as I had no one to watch them. As we talked, Robert watched the kids with a smile, occasionally making silly faces to keep them entertained. "They're great kids," he said after Megan giggled at one of his jokes. "You've done an amazing job raising them." His words meant more than I could say. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and scared. But his belief in me gave me strength. As the hearing approached, Robert prepared me for the challenges ahead. "James will try to paint a picture of you as incapable," he said. "But the truth is on your side. Stay calm, and let me handle the rest." The morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse, clutching my file of documents and trying to steady my nerves. I thought about everything that had brought me to this point: the betrayal, the fear, the nights spent crying into my pillow. And then I thought about Megan and Tyler, about their laughter, their hugs, their unwavering trust in me. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The courthouse was cold and sterile, its towering walls and echoing halls a stark contrast to the warmth of the life I'd once known. I sat beside Robert in the courtroom, my hands trembling as I clutched a folder filled with documents, evidence of my dedication as a mother, financial records, and letters of support from friends and neighbors. I was prepared, at least on paper, but nothing could prepare me for the emotional weight of what was about to unfold. James walked in with Claire at his side, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. They were a striking pair, polished and poised, as if this were just another business meeting. Claire's presence was a deliberate choice, a power play meant to unnerve me, but I kept my gaze steady, refusing to let them see how much it rattled me. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Robert presented our case with confidence, detailing my role as the primary caregiver and emphasizing the stability I provided for Megan and Tyler. His arguments were compelling, and I felt a flicker of hope. Then it was James's turn. His lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman in a sleek black suit, painted me as an unfit parent. She pointed to my part-time work and modest income. arguing that James, with his higher salary, could provide a better life for the children. She spoke of the large house in Chicago, the financial security he offered, and even Claire's willingness to welcome the children into their growing family. It was like being stabbed in the heart. My children didn't need Claire. They needed me, their mother who had been there for every scraped knee. Bedtime story. And school project. My anger simmered just beneath the surface. But I kept my composure. I had to. For them. When the judge turned to me, I stood. My voice trembling but resolute. Your Honor. I began. I may not have the financial means that James does. But I have given my life to raising Megan and Tyler. I've been their constant. Their caregiver. Their safe place. They are my world. I only ask for the chance to continue being their mother in every sense of the word. The judge listened carefully, his expression unreadable. Then Robert stood and made a request that took everyone by surprise. We'd like to call a witness, he said. A witness? The judge asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes. Your Honor. Someone who can provide crucial insight into Mr. Harris's character and actions. Robert replied. The judge nodded. Very well. Bring in the witness. The doors opened. And Hannah walked in. She looked nervous but determined. Her professional demeanor bolstered by Robert's reassuring nod. James's expression shifted instantly from calm confidence to outright panic. Claire, too, looked uneasy, her eyes darting between James and Hannah. Hannah, a secretary at James's company, began her testimony. Your Honor, I'm here to share information about Mr. Harris's conduct at work. Over the past year, he has leaked confidential company data to a competitor in exchange for financial compensation. The courtroom fell silent, save for a sharp intake of breath from James. His lawyer immediately objected, claiming the information was irrelevant. But the judge overruled, allowing Hannah to continue. She described in detail how James had betrayed his employer's trust, risking the company's integrity for personal gain. Her words were measured and precise, her evidence irrefutable. As she spoke, I glanced at James. He was visibly shaken, his composure unraveling with each revelation. The testimony concluded, and the judge called for a recess. During the break, Robert leaned toward me, his voice low. This changes everything, he said. James's credibility is in question now, and that works in our favor. When the session resumed, James's lawyer scrambled to salvage their case. But the damage was done. The judge, after much deliberation, delivered his verdict. Full custody of Megan and Tyler would be awarded to me, with visitation rights for James. The property division would be addressed separately. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The fight wasn't over, but I had won the most important battle. Megan and Tyler would stay with me. As the session ended, James avoided my gaze. Claire, on the other hand, looked livid, her facade of composure cracking. Outside the courthouse, Robert and I stood in the crisp afternoon air, the weight of the day settling around us. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I couldn't have done this without you. Robert smiled, his eyes kind. You did this, Emily. You fought for your family. I just helped. That evening, as I tucked Megan and Tyler into bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. I had fought for my children, and I had won. After the custody hearing, I felt a fragile sense of victory, but life was far from settling down. Megan and Tyler were finally safe with me, yet James seemed determined to make things difficult. He filed for property division almost immediately, and the process was nothing short of grueling. I knew I couldn't let my guard down, not when the children and I needed stability so desperately. Days turned into weeks, and we adjusted to our small rental apartment. Megan was a trooper, always cheerful and helpful, though I caught her staring wistfully at pictures of our old house. Tyler was too young to fully grasp what had happened. But he sometimes asked, "When are we going home, Mommy?" Those questions cut deep. But I answered gently, "This is our home now, sweetheart." Robert continued to be a pillar of support, guiding me through the legal maze. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, he called with unexpected news. "Emily," he began, "I've uncovered some troubling information about James." My stomach knotted. "What do you mean?" "It turns out his financial troubles run deeper than we thought. Between supporting Claire, legal fees, and his questionable business decisions, he's stretched thin. This could work in our favor during the property division hearing, but it might also complicate things." It was bittersweet news. On one hand, it could mean a more favorable outcome for me. On the other, it reinforced how little James had left to offer, not just to me, but to our children. Meanwhile, James's behavior became more erratic. He stopped coming for scheduled visits with Megan and Tyler, leaving me to field their questions and disappointment. Megan, ever the perceptive one, asked me one night, "Does Dad still love us?" Her words broke my heart. "Of course he does, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Your dad is just figuring out how to handle everything right now. But he loves you very much." I wasn't sure if I believed my own words, but I knew Megan needed reassurance. As we approached the date for the property division hearing, I prepared myself for yet another confrontation with James. Robert had been thorough in building our case, but I couldn't shake the anxiety. The thought of sharing a courtroom with James and Claire again filled me with dread. The day of the hearing arrived, and I stood outside the courthouse, clutching my coat tightly against the biting wind. Robert joined me, his presence as steadying as ever. "You're ready for this," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Just remember, the truth is on your side." Inside, the atmosphere was tense. James was already there, sitting beside Claire, who wore an air of smug confidence. I avoided looking at them, focusing instead on Robert's quiet reassurances. The judge began by reviewing the shared assets, our family home, 2 cars, and a handful of savings. James argued that he had paid for most of it and deserved the lion's share. "Emily didn't contribute financially," he said. His tone clipped. That comment stung. But the judge didn't let it slide. "Ms. Harris may not have contributed financially in the traditional sense, but raising children is a significant contribution to the family's well-being," the judge said, his tone measured. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and stood. "Your Honor, I cared for our children and our home while James built his career. I don't want more than my fair share. I simply want a home for my children. A place where they feel secure. That's all I'm asking for." James scowled but said nothing. Claire whispered something to him, and he nodded curtly. Then came the moment that changed everything. Robert requested to call another witness. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Another witness?" "Yes, Your Honor," Robert replied. "Someone who can provide crucial context regarding Mr. Harris's character." The doors opened, and Hannah walked in. Claire's smug expression vanished, replaced by visible unease. James stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Hannah's testimony was damning. She detailed James's unethical actions at work, his betrayal of his employer, and his financial desperation. The judge listened intently, asking pointed questions. By the time Hannah finished, James looked pale, and Claire was glaring daggers at her. The judge called for a brief recess. During the break, I turned to Robert. "Do you think this will help?" "It already has," he said confidently. "James's credibility is in shambles, and that gives us the upper hand." When the session resumed, the judge delivered a verdict that brought tears to my eyes. The family home would be sold, and I would receive half of its value. The car I'd been using would remain with me, along with the majority of the savings. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough. Enough to start fresh. enough to give Megan and Tyler the life they deserved. James left the courtroom without a word, Claire trailing behind him. As they passed me, she shot me a glare that I ignored. I had won not just the case, but my freedom from the chaos they had brought into my life. That evening, as I sat with Megan and Tyler in our small apartment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. We were far from the finish line, but for the first time, I believed we were on the right path. The days after the property division hearing were a whirlwind of emotions. Relief at the verdict mingled with exhaustion from the battle. But above all, there was a quiet sense of hope. For the first time in months, I felt like I could begin to rebuild. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to create a stable, loving environment for Megan and Tyler. They had been through so much, and they deserved a home that felt like a sanctuary. Robert remained a steady presence in our lives. He checked in often, not just as my lawyer but as a friend. I found myself looking forward to his calls and visits. His calm voice a source of reassurance amidst the chaos. One afternoon, after picking up Megan from school, I called him to share the good news about the house sale. They finalized the paperwork. I said, "I'll get the funds in a week. It's not much, but it's enough to start fresh." "That's wonderful, Emily," Robert replied, his voice warm. "Have you thought about where you want to go next?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Somewhere close to Megan's school and Tyler's daycare, but affordable enough to manage on my income." "I'll help you look," he said without hesitation. "We'll find a place that feels like home." True to his word, Robert helped me scour listings, driving around the city to view apartments. Megan and Tyler tagged along on the weekends, their excitement growing with each visit. It was during one of these outings that Megan, ever perceptive, asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom," she said as we stood in an empty living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, "is Robert going to live with us?" The question startled me. "Why do you ask?" "Sweetheart." She shrugged, her small face serious. "Because he's always around. And he's nice. I like him." I smiled, my heart swelling at her innocence. "Robert's a good friend, Megan. He's helping us right now. That's all." But as I said the words, I wondered if there was more truth to her observation than I cared to admit. Robert had become an integral part of our lives, and I found myself relying on him more than I'd expected. A week later, we found the perfect apartment, a cozy, sunlit space with enough room for each of us to feel at home. Megan adored the cat-themed wallpaper in her room, while Tyler was thrilled about the playground just a block away. I signed the lease with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Knowing this was the start of a new chapter, moving day was a family affair. Robert showed up early, sleeves rolled up and ready to help. He lifted boxes, assembled furniture, and even brought pizza for lunch. Watching him joke with Megan and Tyler as they unpacked their toys, I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in a long time. He wasn't just helping us move, he was becoming part of our family. That evening, as we sat surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Megan turned to me with a hopeful smile. "Can we have a housewarming party, Mom?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, laughing. "Who should we invite?" "Robert," she said immediately, her enthusiasm contagious. The following weekend, we hosted a small celebration. Robert arrived with thoughtful gifts for the kids, a smart assistant for Megan and a remote-controlled car for Tyler. The children were thrilled, spending most of the evening playing in their rooms while Robert and I sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee and talking. As the night wore on, I found myself opening up to him about my fears and hopes for the future. He listened intently, his presence steady and comforting. When I expressed my gratitude for everything he had done, he shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Emily," he said softly. "I've been through my own struggles, and I know how hard it is to rebuild. You've shown so much strength. It's inspiring." His words stayed with me long after the party ended. That night, As I lay in bed, I realized how much my life had changed since James's betrayal. What I had thought was the end had turned into a new beginning, filled with unexpected kindness and support. A few days later, Robert called to share an idea. "Emily, I know this might sound sudden, but would you like to take the kids on a short trip? A change of scenery might be good for all of you." I hesitated. "I don't know, Robert. Things are tight financially. It's on me," he insisted. "Just think about it." After some deliberation, I agreed. We planned a weekend getaway to a nearby lake, a chance to relax and recharge. The kids were thrilled, and I found myself looking forward to it as well. The trip turned out to be exactly what we needed. Watching Megan and Tyler play in the water, their laughter echoing across the lake, I felt a peace I hadn't known in months. Robert joined in their games, his playful nature endearing him to the kids even more. That evening, as the sun set and the children drifted off to sleep, Robert and I sat by the fire, the crackling flames casting a warm glow. We talked about everything: our pasts, our dreams, our fears. And somewhere in that quiet moment, I realized that I had begun to feel something more for him, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since James. But I wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. Returning from the lake trip felt like stepping into a different chapter of my life. The air between Robert and me had shifted during those quiet moments by the fire, though neither of us had spoken aloud what we both seemed to feel. Still, the tenderness of those unspoken words lingered in my thoughts, a warmth that wrapped around me as I settled back into our routine with Megan and Tyler. Life wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, it felt manageable. The kids were happy in the new apartment, and the neighborhood began to feel like home. Megan had made friends at school, and Tyler loved the playground near our building. Even my work as a translator started to pick up, offering a sense of stability that had felt elusive for months. One evening, as I sorted through papers at the kitchen table, the phone rang. It was James. His calls had become rare, and each one left me bracing for bad news. "Emily," he began, his voice subdued. "I need to talk to you." "What is it?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Claire left," he said after a pause. "She took the baby and moved back to her parents' place." I wasn't sure what I expected him to say, but it wasn't this. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I truly meant it. "She said she couldn't handle everything: my work, the stress, the fallout from the court case." James continued. "I don't blame her." There was a long silence before he added, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what I did to you, to our family. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry." His words, though long overdue, caught me off guard. For months, I had carried the weight of his betrayal, the anger, and the hurt. Now, hearing his regret, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a bittersweet sense of closure. "Thank you for saying that," I said softly. "But James, what's done is done. I've moved on. And you should too. For Megan and Tyler's sake." We ended the call on a polite note, and as I hung up, I felt lighter, as if a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. That chapter of my life was truly closing. Over the next few weeks, Robert became an even more constant presence. He helped with the kids, fixed little things around the apartment, and even joined us for dinner on occasion. Megan and Tyler adored him, and their growing bond only deepened the feelings I had been trying to keep at bay. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Robert stayed a little longer than usual. We sat on the couch, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did with him, but there was an undercurrent of something more. "Emily," he said after a pause, his voice soft, "I've wanted to say this for a while, but I didn't want to rush you. I care about you a lot, and not just as a friend." I looked at him, my heart pounding. Robert. I feel the same way. The words came out before I could second guess them. And the look of relief and joy on his face made me realize I had been holding back feelings that had been growing for months. I wasn't sure if you were ready. After everything you've been through, he said. But I've fallen in love with you, Emily. And I'd like to be here for you, for Megan and Tyler, not just as someone who helps, but as someone who belongs. Tears welled in my eyes as I reached for his hand. I've been so scared of opening up again, I admitted. But you've shown me what love should feel like, kind, patient, and steady. I love you too, Robert. That night, as we sat together in the quiet glow of the living room, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't the fairy tale romance I had once imagined, but it was real, grounded in trust and mutual respect. As the weeks turned into months, Robert became an integral part of our family. He moved into the apartment, bringing a sense of stability and joy that transformed our lives. Megan and Tyler thrived under his care, their laughter filling the spaces that had once felt empty. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Megan looked up from her plate and said, "I'm glad Robert's here. He makes us happy." Her words brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, I knew we had found not just a partner for me, but a father figure for my children, a man who loved us wholeheartedly. Life still had its challenges, but together, we faced them with resilience and hope. We began planning for the future, a family trip, a garden in the small backyard of the apartment building, and even adopting a dog. It wasn't the life I had envisioned all those years ago, but it was ours. And it was beautiful. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not because of where I had been, but because of where I was now with my children, with Robert, and with a life that felt like a second chance at happiness. And so, life carried on, not as the fairy tale I had once envisioned, but as something better, something real. The love I found with Robert wasn't born out of perfection but out of patience, trust, and shared hope for the future. Megan and Tyler flourished in this new chapter of our lives, their laughter filling our home with warmth and joy. Looking back, I realized that James's betrayal, as painful as it was, had led me to discover a strength within myself I never knew existed. It taught me that endings often give way to beginnings, and that true happiness is found not in clinging to the past but in embracing the present with courage and love. With Robert by my side, we built a family rooted in resilience and unity. Together, we faced the ups and downs of life with a newfound confidence, knowing we were stronger together. And while the road ahead might hold its own challenges, I knew we were ready to face them. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales about love, growth, and the extraordinary journeys of ordinary people. See you next time.